talking about this. GE confirming just now it is cutting 12,000 jobs as it shrinks its power business. The company's been struggling with a sharp drop in gas and coal power markets as alternative energy demand increases.
Of those 50% steel and aluminum tariffs, previously, those tariffs shielded items that just simply contained steel and aluminum. Not anymore. Starting this week, those 50% tariffs apply to the steel and aluminum content on many items, right? This impacts more than 400 product categories, right? And some of these are household items, right? Everything from butter knives.
Factories that once roared with the sound of American steel are falling silent. Conveyor belts halted. Parking lots empty. Communities that depended on General Electric for decades now face the echo of a vanished promise. In 2025, GE, an icon of U.S. industry, announced the unthinkable. It will shutter plants across the Midwest and Northeast, sending production to Mexico, Eastern Europe, and Southeast Asia. This isn't just another corporate cost-cutting measure. It's the collapse of a belief that tariffs and protectionist walls could shield America's workers. Instead, those very tariffs have driven one of America's most historic companies out of its homeland. Thousands of workers fired, schools, roads, and towns left scrambling for survival. And the fallout doesn't stop there, because what comes next reveals a deeper fracture in America's economic future. Like and subscribe, and keep watching, because this story only gets darker. The announcement hit like a thunderclap. General Electric, once the very embodiment of American industrial power, declared that its U.S. plants would be shut down. Not downsized, not temporarily suspended, shut down. Entire facilities in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and upstate New York will go dark, their machinery dismantled or sold off, their workers handed severance packages that feel more like surrender letters. Why? The answer on paper looks simple: cost. But behind that cold calculation lies a storm of political decisions, global pressures, and strategic retreat. For years, GE tried to weather the turbulence of Trump's escalating tariffs. The White House promised these levies would revive U.S. manufacturing. The idea was straightforward: penalize imports, pressure companies to produce domestically, and reward American workers. But what happened in practice was the opposite. Raw material prices soared. Steel and aluminum costs jumped by double digits. Suppliers passed those hikes down the chain. Suddenly, building turbines, engines, and high-tech equipment in America wasn't just challenging, it was financially suicidal. GE's leadership spent months running scenarios. Automation? Already tried. Union negotiations? Exhausted. Consolidation of supply chains, implemented years earlier, but nothing offset the crushing reality of tariffs layered on top of inflation, energy costs, and regulatory overhead. Each product built on American soil carried a price tag thousands of dollars higher than its foreign competitors. Customers in Europe, Asia, and Latin America simply walked away. So the decision was made: relocate. Mexico offered cheaper labor and tariff relief under regional trade loopholes. Eastern Europe brought access to the EU market, with governments dangling tax incentives to lure investment. Southeast Asia provided scale, factories capable of producing at half the cost while tapping into fast-growing consumer markets. For GE's accountants, it was not a betrayal, but survival. But for America's industrial heartland, the optics are devastating. These were the very communities promised revival under protectionism. They were told tariffs would bring back jobs, restore dignity, and secure a future. Instead, they now face abandoned factories and unemployment lines. Workers in their 40s and 50s, too young to retire, too old to start over, must watch their livelihoods vanish overseas. Local diners, hardware stores, and gas stations that thrived on GE paychecks will feel the ripple immediately. And school districts already stretched thin will see tax revenues collapse.
This isn't just an economic story. It's psychological warfare on the middle class. For decades, GE was more than an employer. It was proof that America could still build, still innovate, still matter in the global economy. Losing that symbol under the weight of tariffs doesn't just sting, it shatters confidence in the very narrative of industrial revival. And yet, GE's leadership insists they had no alternative. The economics no longer work, one executive bluntly admitted. Investors applauded the move, seeing cost reductions of up to 20% in the long run. Wall Street rallied, but Main Street saw betrayal. Here lies the contradiction. A policy designed to punish companies for leaving has instead accelerated their exit. Tariffs didn't anchor GE to US soil, they pushed it away. And once a giant like GE sets the precedent, others follow. Already Honeywell and Caterpillar are rumored to be drawing up contingency plans. States dangle tax breaks, but even billions in incentives may not compete with the cost savings abroad. This is where the American experiment and protectionism runs headfirst into global reality. Borders may be closed, but supply chains are not. And as GE packs its bags from Mexico, Eastern Europe, and Southeast Asia, the question echoes louder than ever. Who's really winning this trade war? But that wasn't the whole story, because what happened inside GE's boardrooms before the decision was announced revealed just how desperate and divided the leadership truly was. Behind the closed doors of GE's boardrooms, the debate raged for months. Senior executives knew what was at stake. Walking away from American soil wasn't just a financial calculation, it was a reputational gamble. Could GE, a company that once lit the nation's homes and powered its factories, justify abandoning the very workers who built its legacy? The answer in the end was shaped by numbers no amount of nostalgia could overcome. Automation pilots had shown promise, but the capital required was staggering, and labor savings still couldn't neutralize the tariff burden. Union leaders pushed for concessions, proposing wage freezes and benefit cuts, but GE calculated even those sacrifices couldn't match the cost reductions available abroad. Supply chain consolidation, once a saving grace, now backfired, as tariffs applied not only to finished goods, but also to imported parts. The model was broken, and no patchwork fix would save it. Still, the human cost weighed heavily. Reports circulated of board members privately acknowledging the moral hazard of relocation, but investors were unrelenting. Shareholders demanded profitability. Competitors already operated leaner global networks. Standing still meant losing contracts, losing markets, and ultimately losing the company. Faced with that binary choice, sacrifice America or sacrifice GE, the leadership chose survival.
The fallout at home was immediate. Town halls filled with angry workers, union halls became stages for fiery speeches, and local leaders scrambled for answers. Mayors warned of fiscal shortfalls. Governors begged Washington for emergency support. Families faced choices no trade model ever captures, whether to sell their homes, uproot their kids, or stay behind in communities now turning into economic deserts. The pain wasn't just financial, it was generational. Sons and daughters who once imagined stable careers at GE suddenly confronted a future without those opportunities. Middle-class pride, tied so closely to steady industrial work, fractured. The psychological message was brutal. If even GE could no longer afford to build in America, who could? Financial markets, however, saw things differently. Analysts predicted that GE's restructuring could cut production costs by 20% over 5 years, boosting competitiveness abroad. Stock prices jumped, even as unemployment lines lengthened. It was the familiar story of Wall Street celebrating while Main Street burned. But GE's retreat was not an isolated event. Honeywell, Caterpillar, and other manufacturing giants began preparing contingency plans. States dangled tax incentives, promising billions in subsidies to keep factories open. Yet even those offers looked pale against the efficiencies of relocating abroad. The message was clear. America was no longer the cheapest, easiest, or most reliable place to build, and the global stage noticed. European nations openly courted U.S. firms with generous packages. Southeast Asia positioned itself as the next industrial hub. Mexico, leveraging proximity and lower labor costs, suddenly became the back door into the U.S. market. America's rivals didn't need to outmaneuver Washington, they simply waited for U.S. tariffs to do the job for them. What made GE's decision so symbolic was its timing. Coming years into a tariff war that was supposed to restore industrial greatness, instead underscored the fragility of America's manufacturing base. Protectionism, once marketed as salvation, had turned into a slow poison. Instead of protecting workers, it isolated them, making domestic production unviable while foreign competitors surged ahead. By 2025, the U.S. faced a crossroads. Communities across the Midwest and Northeast watched their anchors disappear. Policymakers were forced to confront uncomfortable questions. Were tariffs truly the path to industrial revival, or were they accelerating the very decline they were meant to stop? Because what GE just exposed wasn't only a corporate strategy, it was a national vulnerability. And unless America finds a way to rebuild smarter, not just harder, this collapse may only be the beginning. General Electric's retreat is more than a corporate headline. It's a signal flare for America's future. The very policies designed to protect workers have instead hollowed out factories, fractured communities, and forced a reckoning with the realities of global competition. The question now isn't just what happens to GE, it's what happens to America. Will policymakers double down on tariffs, risking more exits? Or will they craft a smarter strategy to balance competitiveness with community survival? Because make no mistake, every plant that closes leaves behind more than empty buildings. It leaves behind broken trust. This story matters, not just for workers in Ohio or Pennsylvania, but for anyone who cares about where their nation is heading. If you believe these questions deserve answers, hit that like button, subscribe, and keep watching, because the debate over America's industrial future, it's only getting started.